Good afternoon and welcome to another edition of the CannaList Conversation. We are here with Brian Ross of the Ross Law Group. Brian, how are you?
I'm doing well, Mike. How are you?
I am good. So tell us a little bit about how you guys got into cannabis.
Oh, gosh. Well, I've been a practicing attorney for close to 25 years, working with a lot of emerging companies, primarily in the tech and new media space, also apparel companies. I spent about half of that time as a big law attorney, and about half of that time I was an in-house general counsel with a few different companies, a couple of which got acquired along the way. And about 7 years ago, I went back into the private practice setting with my partner. And I continue to work with those tech companies, but I was also immediately approached by a number of cannabis providers and cannabis operators. And this was around 2016 when California was undergoing its shift. It had just passed Prop 64 to legalize adult use cannabis in California. And the whole state was looking forward to 2018 when the new rules would kick in and all the legacy operators would have to make the transition into the licensed ecosystem. So a lot of companies began to talk with me about how to prepare for that and also how to do their best to remain compliant, under state law in the meantime. So we started working with these companies. And again, that includes companies that were touching the plant, like growers, manufacturers, retailers, and also companies that are ancillary to the industry, providing technology services or even tangible goods like grow cubes and other hydroponic equipment and things of the sort. And now it probably represents, a good percentage, maybe half of my practice from time to time.
And how do you reconcile it's legal on the state level, but not legal on the federal level? What does that mean from a law perspective?
Well, my job is to help my clients navigate and comply with the law. So what I explain to them, and the Bar Association of California and other bar associations, believe the same, is when I start working with a client who touches the cannabis industry, I explain to them that I'm not here to help them evade or violate federal law. I will not do that. What I will do is I will help them properly navigate, applicable law, state and local law, so that they can comply and provide, cannabis or cannabis services in a safe and, legal manner.
And so, 2018, California goes with adult use. Everything is going to be great. And here we are 4 years later, and the industry is struggling. It's being taxed to death. What happened along the way?
Some of that's above my pay grade, but I'll tell you, yeah, in some ways it feels like California's experienced a perfect storm of, situations that, isolate and burden people who try to do the right thing and try to obtain a license and try to, provide, regulated, business activities. You have crushing taxes in California for cannabis companies. You have local taxes that any jurisdiction imposes. You have the state excise tax, the state cannabis cultivation tax. You have obviously sales tax imposed at the point of retail sale, and that is on top of excise tax. And then you have federal taxes that a company is responsible for. And most of us know that under the federal tax code, there is a section, called 280E. It's numbered 280E, and it doesn't allow cannabis companies to take ordinary business deductions. So companies have incredibly tight margins. Also, California imposed a really burdensome set of regulations, actually 3 sets of regulations, depending on what part of the supply chain you're in, that you have to comply with, and really burdensome compliance requirements to get an annual license, including jumping through a number of hoops around environmental law compliance and the sort. Probably all things that are necessary in some way or another, but very difficult for these legacy operators to achieve unless they're incredibly well capitalized. And then you have another problem, which is these cannabis deserts up and down California, because Prop 64 allowed local jurisdictions to opt out of cannabis, right? So without enough licensed retailers to absorb the product that's being grown, you have downward price pressure, you have a glut of product, and all these conspire to make it really difficult for operators. And so the illicit market, which doesn't have any of these concerns, they just keep operating how they operate, they've been flourishing.
And California is a legacy market. It was one of the first, But when we look at markets like Colorado that seem to be doing so much better and are supporting economic development, job creation, why does California continue to be so onerous?
I don't know. I don't think if you look at any emerging jurisdiction, even a slightly older one like Colorado, that they're all free of problems. You know, every location has its own pressures and concerns. But, you know, California is so enormous. And I think personally it has a real predisposition to, you know, imposing, you know, high taxes and doesn't want to roll them back. There's been several opportunities introduced, you know, in the state legislature to temporarily or even more, you know, permanently give some of these operators tax relief. And those have all so far been rejected. So it's really hard to pin down exactly what the problem is. I've identified some of the problems in general, but I think each state tries to learn from each other as we go. And you look at some of the newest emerging states like, you know, New Jersey and New York back east, and at least so far, it looks like they're on the right path. Another thing, California, at least Los Angeles here where we are, one of the largest marketplaces in the world, what they've done is prioritized social equity front and center in terms of rolling out, you know, the license program. And social equity is an admirable goal, and it should be part of any discussion about cannabis legalization. But in some ways, you know, there's a competing balance you have to achieve between letting the market, you know, respond to market forces and holding back the market to properly account for social equity. And I think we're all still struggling to find that balance.
Yeah, and you layer on top of social equity, while the intent, as you said, is good, the practicality is somewhat unrealistic, right? Because we know to establish a dispensary, you're looking at a minimum of $1 million. And, you know, most of our social equity applicants don't have $1 million. So, you know, what we've seen in the past is predatory partners who come in with capital, and then basically once they get the, you know, social equity license, you know, turn around and then, you know, push out the social equity player.
Yeah, we've seen that. And in places like Los Angeles, where they have a social equity program established, they've tried repeatedly to, you know, uncover those scenarios and unearth any, you know, corporate documents or side arrangements or side letters where, you know, on paper, it looks like the proper, you know, social equity friendly setup, but on the side, it's actually, you know, predatory. And, you know, I don't know, I guess there's mixed success on that front. But yeah, you know, you have a situation where you're requiring the partner who brings the capital to essentially give 51% control in many cases to the social equity operator. And when one party is providing all the capital, and sometimes, you know, most of the operational know-how, it's really hard for them to get comfortable with that. You know, they're essentially giving over control to someone who's, you know, unproven or maybe less proven as, you know, as a business operator. So that's been one challenge. And, you know, another challenge I probably should mention in California is that when Prop 64 was enacted, there was sort of a promise made to the electorate that we would help the small, you know, legacy operators and protect them, including smaller size cultivators. But as the regulations under Prop 64 were being pushed out, there was a last minute reversal, and companies were allowed to acquire multiple cultivation licenses. It's called stacking. So you could essentially build an enormous cultivation facility and try to achieve economies of scale if you had the capital before, you know, the 2023 window was properly supposed to open for grows of that size. And so you had a situation where the smaller operators were immediately put on the defensive, and they're still on the defensive.
And so what does that mean for the direction of the industry? I mean, is big cannabis inevitable?
Well, I don't know. You tell me. I think so, right? You know, we have an emerging industry. There's a lot of capital behind it. There's continuing legalization spreading across the U.S. and even internationally. New markets are opening up, new opportunities. Everyone recognizes that opportunity. But whenever you introduce, you know, those capitalistic forces, and what we're talking about is a plant, right? It's an agricultural commodity. And I suppose it shouldn't cost more than a tomato. When you think about it, you're growing a plant. but there's been a risk premium associated with cannabis historically, and there's been and there's a number of ways that the product has to be properly handled that add to the price. But in some ways, it might be unrealistic to expect the days of the past to continue going forward when large companies do get involved.
And we also think, I mean, I'm guessing that the price of the tomato is subsidized.
The price of tomato, I don't know if there's tomato subsidies. There certainly are agricultural subsidies, but
I mean, just to make it affordable for the average person,
Yeah, I mean, that's the other thing. There's a difference between medical and adult use cannabis, right? And if you get medical cannabis in California with an ID card, you get a break on certain taxes at the point of sale or point of purchase. But beyond that, there's not a lot of meaningful differences between medical cannabis and recreational cannabis here in the state.
I mean, other than compliance, what's the motivation for a legacy player to want to be legal?
Well, I mean, look, if you aren't legal, you can't participate in the regulated, marketplace. And there's still a lot of opportunity here, in the regulated marketplace. But even there's even a lot of talk about license holders having to subsidize their operations by sort of catering to the illicit marketplace to one degree or another. I mean, California just produces too much cannabis for its needs, for its legal needs. So there's been
because of the issues with the federal, we can't ship it to other states.
Yeah, so far interstate commerce has not been allowed, and it was one of the enforcement priorities that the Obama administration identified in it's called the Cole II memo. I think back in 2013, the Associate Attorney General put out this memo telling its prosecutors where to focus their efforts. And one of the things was, if someone's state legal, maybe you don't pay so much attention to going after them, but if they're crossing state lines, yes. And so that's something that states picked up on, and they prohibited interstate commerce in the state laws. There's a law professor out there in Vanderbilt University who wonders whether that might be subject to constitutional challenge, but that's another question. But yes, interstate commerce has the potential to help relieve the product glut if we can ship excess, cannabis to other legalized states. And there's even a bill now that's been introduced this year in the state legislature to allow that. But there's some questions about whether this is really the right time to allow interstate commerce. Even if it were legally, permitted at this point, the question is, when you allow exports, you also allow imports. And when you have a number of local operators who are already challenged by the things we've been talking about, and now you introduce the challenge of having to fend off out-of-state competitors who are introducing products into California, is it the right time to do that? I don't know the answer to that question necessarily.
Brian, I know that you publish a bi-monthly report. Can you tell us a little bit about that and its intent?
Yeah, sure. I publish the Ross Report, where it's an email newsletter, and it's free. And what we try to do in that newsletter is provide an overview for folks of all the the changes that we find interesting or relevant in this industry. And that can be legal developments, it can be cultural or news trends, and that we focus on these at the California level, at the local Southern California level, and at the international and US level. And so we don't pick up every story because that would be too much, but what we try to do is give folks who are in or want to be in or servicing the industry a way to stay up to date on some of the trends.
I know in a recent edition that I read, you talked about the NBA player in Russia and sort of that. Can you talk about that a little bit?
You mean Brittney Griner?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, she's been detained by Russia. They said that they found, cannabis vaporizer cartridges in her luggage, and that was a violation of Russian law. There's questions about whether she's, obviously being used as a pawn right now in connection with the whole, geopolitical situation with Russia invading Ukraine and the Cold War heating up again with the US. And, I can't sit here and deny that that's the case. I hope I hope for her speedy return.
Yeah, unfortunately, what was it last week? They announced that they're extending it to at least May. for her. So, she's in a tough spot. But, that's just an example of sort of the other sort of news items that will come across the Ross report, beyond
Yeah.
sort of legal issues.
Yeah, and we also highlighted recently a raid that was conducted on a dispensary here in Los Angeles, fully licensed dispensary, part of a fully licensed cannabis conglomerate of sorts. And this company paid, several $millions in taxes to the state in the previous years, but there was some tax discrepancy because during the COVID pandemic, for a while, the tax office, they shut their doors. They wouldn't allow in-person visits. And when you have to pay your cannabis taxes in cash because of the problems getting access to banking, you need to make an in-person visit to the tax office to do that. And so because this company wasn't able to do that, the tax authorities assessed a fine, about $60,000, which is small compared to the amount of taxes they've been paying and are happy to pay. But the company scheduled a hearing to have, this tax fine, reversed, and try to explain the circumstances, why it was imposed and why it shouldn't have been imposed. And while that hearing was pending, there was an armed raid on the dispensary. They came in, 3 different agencies or 4 agencies, I don't know, came in, emptied the cash registers at gunpoint, took the tip jar money, everything else. And I guess the question raised in the industry was, why was this necessary? If a more traditional company like Macy's or Jamba Juice had a tax discrepancy that they were waiting to be heard, would there be an armed raid on the store? It seems like there's special treatment still for cannabis operators because of the history of cannabis over the last 80 years. And so these are the kind of stories we highlight.
And that special treatment, what is that residual of it? I mean, is it just the old mentality of the legislators? Is there lobbyists that are pushing for these types of things? What is the, underlying reason for something like this?
It's hard to say. I mean, it could be, there's continued social stigma around cannabis use or cannabis businesses. Old habits die hard, I suppose. Law enforcement agencies are used to, busting people for handling cannabis. And I guess there's still a perception that anyone involved in the industry, must be a criminal. And this is what, we work hard to try to reverse.
And so you do that by associating yourselves with lots of other cannabis folks, do you not?
Associating myself?
Yeah. I'm giving you a hard time. I mean, what I'm talking about is you provide networking for the cannabis industry. Can you speak to that?
Oh, well, I'm a member of an organization called Provisors, and we're a national organization with several thousand members who provide professional services, and it's to every industry, right? So Provisors members include lawyers like myself, accountants, CFOs, HR, marketing professionals, insurance, real estate, you name it, right? And we meet with other members to network, like other networking groups, and we meet based on our geography, and sometimes we meet based on the subject matter of certain areas that we work. And I am the leader of one of the cannabis networking groups within Provisors. So yeah, I run a monthly meeting where we get together and we learn new content about the industry, and we have networking opportunities.
And how important is that to people within the industry to have that kind of outlet?
I think it's crucial. I mean, I've discovered in this industry that it's very much based on trust and handshakes and relationships, maybe as much or more than any other industry because of its history. So if you have a desire to support this growing industry, which is already worth billions and is projected to be double or triple in size over the coming years, then you have to start developing those networks. And you can do it through an organization like mine, or you can do it through other ways that I've done it, like attending expos, by attending mixers, by getting involved in the deal flow, and through that meeting other folks. It's just the natural progression.
And have you seen, are the in-person events starting to come back? Are we starting to see, I mean, I know that we've seen Hall of Flowers and we've seen MJ Biz, but are these events coming back, and are people ready for that?
I think so. I think people have absorbed, the safety requirements for, around COVID, whether it's masks or whatever. I mean, here in LA County, we've seen, the mask mandates easing and almost going away entirely now. People are still aware that there's new variants out there, but I think people are cautious when they need to be, but people are ready to get back together in person. And that's why I think you're seeing these expos, coming back in force. Yeah.
And we talked a little bit about, what are the alternatives to big cannabis? There's a hypothesis that we follow the craft beer model. What's your thought on that?
Yeah, there's a lot of talk about that. There's been a lot of talk about in the alcohol world. You have maybe a Budweiser who's going to take, the large market share and produce a consistent, low price product. And then you have certain, craft manufacturers who are going to produce maybe a more artisan product for a smaller market, maybe charge more and differentiate themselves through quality or branding or whatever. So the same idea has, been thought possible in cannabis. It's still uncertain whether this craft cannabis model is going to play out. But I think everyone recognizes that, especially farmers and manufacturers, that, again, they are dealing in a commodity product. And yeah, there are differences between cultivars. Some people call them strains, but I like to call different varieties of the plant cultivars. There's differences in terms of flavor and effect and quality, and differences versus indoor and outdoor grown and all these other things. But at the end of the day, one real important way to distinguish yourself is with customers is through building a brand. And so there's a lot of brand building efforts going on right now to set yourself apart. And a lot of the thought around that is, I'm going to create my craft cannabis model, and I'm going to appeal to a specialized niche, or I'm going to provide a unique cultivar, unique genetics that no one else has, and I'm going to differentiate myself. And we're still seeing that play out. Yeah.
I was having lunch today, and someone asked me what I thought of HHC, and I was like, well, I'm not exactly sure what that is, but it's somewhere along the lines of a workaround, such as a Delta 8. So how do these technically legal products that, basically circumvent the laws, how do they harm the industry?
Yeah, we're touching on a real interesting topic, right? A real controversial one. And if you talk about Delta 8 THC, that's an interesting one, right? We could talk about that for an hour. Excuse me. So when you think of cannabis and the high, the euphoria that people feel when they consume it, much of that is based on THC. When Delta 9 tetrahydrocannabinol is the name for this cannabinoid, the substance. There's other substances found in cannabis. There's other cannabinoids like CBD and then some of the others, and there's terpenes and there's flavonoids, all kinds of things that come together to create the so-called entourage effect that creates the feeling. And you can distill the THC out and put into products, or you can whatever. So people realized that if you take CBD and you can derive that CBD from cannabis, from marijuana cannabis, or you can derive it from hemp cannabis. And really, hemp and marijuana are the same plant, except hemp legally has to contain very trace amounts of THC at most. So you can take CBD out of the plant and you can do something to it in the laboratory. You can synthesize it to create Delta 8 THC, which is like a cousin of Delta 9 and sort of an analog to Delta 9. And it has an intoxicating effect as well. But because it's derived from CBD, there's an argument that it's still just hemp, and it should be regulated differently than marijuana is regulated. And, some states have reacted by banning Delta 8 altogether. Some states have instead decided they're going to regulate it like Delta 9 and impose testing and other requirements on it. And I think we're still seeing that play out. And yeah, the race continues. If Delta 8 stops being popular, they're going to turn to other, synthetics, like Delta 10 is another one that's emerging. But that's sort of a side discussion. I mean, you get into these battles between, cannabis operators and hemp company operators over, whether these products should be permitted. I don't think the answer has been fully decided yet.
Yeah, I mean, I brought it up because what I was sort of speaking to is, here we have an industry that is trying really hard to be transparent, to make sure that we are doing testing, to make sure that we're labeling. And, then we see entrants into the market who are taking advantage of a loophole to cash in quickly, right? We saw this when CBD emerged, where people were promoting CBD and making all types of claims about, some magical medicinal, stuff that they had with no particular evidence, but they just rushed to market. They, made these claims and figured, we'll deal with them when we get slapped, right? And, what we found was that, a lot of the CBD product that was in the market didn't even contain CBD because there was no testing and there was no labeling. So, I guess what I was sort of speaking to is the challenges between, a legitimate market that's trying to be legit, that's trying to do compliance and following through, and then, the folks that are trying to make a quick buck.
Yeah, look, no doubt. I mean, if you ask me where I stand, I think these products, if they have an intoxicating effect or if they have, a medical impact on your body, they should be properly regulated. That doesn't mean they should be, forever delayed from emerging into the market, like we've seen happen with CBD so far. Doesn't mean there should be, impossible roadblocks put up. But yeah, there is a problem when someone's putting an untested, maybe adulterated product out into the market, or they're putting it into a place where minors can buy it without medical authorization. They're putting it into the stream of commerce without proper labeling or marketing. Those are all true, and those need to be fixed 100%.
And one last question for you. There's a saying, be careful what you ask for. What happens with federal legalization? I've heard a lot of people within the industry that aren't in a big hurry for that because of the oversight, because of what it might do to THC, levels and things like that. Have you heard that as well?
Yeah, well, look, federal legalization is a hot topic. It's always on the minds of the industry, and everyone's trying to read the tea leaves and figure out which way the wind is blowing with federal legalization. And
yeah,
so far,
they're smoking the leaves, but okay.
Yeah, exactly. Good. So far that legalization is not anywhere on the short-term horizon. It wasn't under recent administrations. It's not under the Biden administration either. There are continuing attempts in Congress to introduce legislation, but they get caught up on where the legislation should focus, or whether the legislation is burdened with controversial provisions that really don't need to be in there to push forward these initiatives. So, and then the other question is how legalization would be achieved if and when it comes to pass. Are you going to take cannabis and deschedule it entirely? Right now it's a Schedule I drug. It's considered the most dangerous substance known to man other than plutonium. And the question is, do you deschedule it like alcohol or tobacco, or do you reschedule it down to a lower level list, but it's still regulated as a drug? And then what would that do? Would that allow big pharma or other big companies to steamroll over smaller operators and social equity operators? These are the big questions. But yes, I've seen that without federal legalization, a lot of the big companies have been sidelined and remain sidelined, which has had an interesting effect of allowing smaller size operators to emerge and really get a foothold in this market. And even things like accounting systems and CRM software and point of sale tracking, all these software solutions have been developed by cannabis focused companies. Even though other alternatives already exist on the traditional marketplace, those other operators are afraid to let them be used for cannabis. So this is creating an opportunity for other people to come in and provide solutions. So a lot of people who are in the industry and who are succeeding right now, they like the status quo, and they probably don't want legalization, federal legalization to come in just yet.
And so, going out through the rest of 2022 and into 2023, what are the biggest challenges that your clients are facing?
Well, they're continuing to face, a lot of clients here in California, they're continuing to face these pressures around taxation and competition from the illicit market and the regulations. The regulations are undergoing another overhaul right now to try to streamline them and further consolidate them and make them more user-friendly. But it's still a real onerous process. California is about to close the doors on March 31st to almost anyone who wants to obtain a provisional license, which is a lot easier to obtain than your full-fledged annual license. So after March 31, if you're a new entrant and you're not willing to come in and try to buy into an existing license, you're gonna have a lot more hurdles and a lot more months or even years ahead of you before you can officially open your doors. So it's getting harder to compete. It's getting harder to enter the market. And I think a lot of people are looking to other states for new, evergreen opportunities.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the issues that, folks who aren't that familiar with the market is, even when the legislation gets passed, it's not a magical solution. It doesn't mean that tomorrow everything is fixed. We're seeing this in New York, right? It was, legalized, what, 3 years ago, and they're still trying to figure out how to implement it. So, the challenge is, whether it's on the federal level or on the local level, that even once you pass the legislation, then you have to go figure out how to implement it. And that could be years.
Yeah, well, again, this is what we talked about of each state learning from other states that have come before. You have existing sets of regulations that can almost be cut and pasted with some modifications, depending on the state, but we're learning more as we go. And again, all this is driven by this unique situation where this industry is legal state level and illegal federally. But these regulations all have a couple of common themes throughout. One is, of course, discouraging criminal activity, but the other is consumer safety. And even that's a moving target. What does consumer safety mean? What's an acceptable dosage? What is a safe dosage? What if you're pregnant? What if you're taking other medications? A lot of it comes down to the need for research and continued medical research and scientific research. And a lot of that has been stymied so far because of federal rules. It's been very difficult to get the proper grade cannabis and conduct studies. There's been thousands of studies conducted, but still more research is needed.
Brian, we very much appreciate your time today, and thank you for sharing your insights. If folks want to learn more about you and sign up for the newsletter, where should they go?
Yeah, Mike, thank you. If they want to learn more about us, they can visit us at rosslegalcorp.com. That's Corp, C-O-R-P. And if you go to rosslegalcorp.com, you can also send us an email and sign up for my newsletter. Again, it's free and it'll appear in your inbox every 2 weeks or so. And you can also contact us if you have any questions about navigating the landscape.
Well, Brian, again, we appreciate your time. We look forward to great things for you, and keep doing fighting the good fight.
Mike, thank you. And you as well. Take care.